Hi everyone, my name is Matt and I'm part of the team here at the Meeting Place. And I just want to thank you for tuning in online or if you're here with us on weekend on Wednesdays. We are starting a new series, Come and See. It's going to be awesome. You should be excited because I am. Here's Pastor Tony.
Well, hey, thanks for joining in with us at the Meeting Place. It's great to have you guys in the room with us here at our weekends on Wednesday. It's great to have all of you that are tuning in with us online. And I'm excited for today because today we are starting a brand new series. The series is called Come and See. And which might sound a little bit weird. We're like, well, I'm already here. I can already see you, But here's the thing about this series. This is what we're going to get to. Is this series is all about how the Gospel of John. So John is one of Jesus' best friends, and John is a disciple of Jesus, and later in John's life, he writes his own recollection of his experiences with Jesus. And so it's called the Gospel of John. That's how we receive it today in our Bibles, but a better name for it would probably just because the word gospel means good news, and so really it could be considered just the good news according to John. And so we're going to be learning from that, but John has a method to how he writes his gospel. He has a way of pointing people to Jesus, and he talks about it in the terms of signs. And so we're going to learn from John over the next few weeks on how he's inviting us to come and see and really find the person of Jesus. And so we're excited about that. And before we jump into the stories in the Gospel of John, I think it's important for us to kind of pull out a couple phrases that he uses, because sometimes these phrases in this modern church culture can be very easily misunderstood as we relate them to religion or church context. And so the terms are this, basically. These are terms you've heard before, the term faith and the term believe. And so setting these into, or if we take religion and we take church culture, we take theology and set that aside for a minute, like we all have a really good understanding probably of what these words mean, how we would utilize these two words and put them in a sentence, and we understand what they look like in our own home and in our own context, in our neighborhood, and how we would use these words today. We have a general idea of what they mean, but for some reason, they often get misrepresented and misapplied in religious and theological settings. See, in the real world, we believe things based on evidence. We believe things based on what we see and what we read, what we hear, what we've experienced, and what we know. We even will believe things based on the level of credibility that we give to the someone or the something that is informing us in delivering the information. And so we base beliefs on evidence. Now, from time to time, though, we receive evidence of something, of some kind of belief, and it can be conflicting, right? We can receive two different types of information that seem to be at odds with each other. You get two pieces of information, and then you're not sure what to believe. Now, it wouldn't take long to just dive into what's happening in our culture today to realize there's information on all sides of all sorts of things, on political things. And it's like, well, what am I supposed to believe? This party says this party says this. How do I know what's true? What's really best? There's COVID things in response to COVID, churches' responses to COVID, all these things. And there's information from all sides. And it seems to be conflicting often. It's like, what am I supposed to believe? For example, let's just keep it light, okay? Let's not get into some of that stuff today, okay? I don't want you to click away or walk out of the room, okay? But for example, something as simple as coffee. Is coffee good for you? Is coffee, okay, well, someone says, yeah. Is coffee good? Now, here's the thing, is that it used to be for a long time, there was a lot of research that said, yeah, coffee is good for you. And then some research started to come out, well, maybe it's not good. Maybe caffeine's not good for you. Maybe coffee stunts your growth. And so people started to say, no, coffee's not good for you. And then more research comes out and says, no, actually it is good. And in moderation, caffeine can be good, and it can help you increase focus and all these things. And so what happens then is we take this information that seems to be conflicting, and we're not sure what to believe, but then we actually already have a side we've chosen to be on. And because we've chosen something for coffee, we choose to believe the information that often we already agree with. And so we call that a confirmation bias, where you have a certain bias to what you already believe. And so when information comes in, you tend to just push away the stuff that doesn't already align with what you believe. If it butt heads with it, If it confronts your beliefs and says they might be wrong, we often just dismiss that as, well, that's their information and that's their wrong. Bless their heart, we'll pray for them, right? And so for me, I can take all the information I know about coffee and say, I 100%, I believe that it's just not good for you, okay? I think it does stunt your growth. Look at me, I don't drink it, and I'm pretty tall. But no, I could care less about coffee, and I could care less about a lot of the things that we believe about, but oftentimes these beliefs and our own confirmation bias, it causes us to make divisional lines between us and them. Between people that we care about sometimes, it makes divisional lines between people that are close friends or even close family, or even people that are sitting next to us in a church service, and yet it's like we hold so tightly to our own beliefs that we just can't get on the same page with someone else, and we receive information that seems to disagree with us. Our own confirmation bias will kick in, and we say, well, yeah, that's obviously not true because it doesn't line up with what I already believe, and we can quickly dismiss any opposing views of information. So here's where confirmation bias and the term faith and believe get really twisted and misinterpreted when it gets put into a religious or a theological context. In fact, here's a couple myths that often get perpetuated about faith, okay? So here's one myth, is that faith equals certainty. Faith equals certainty. There's this idea that often gets perpetuated in church world that in order to have faith, you must have absolute certainty that God exists. And if you have any doubt in your mind about that whatsoever, then your faith must be on rocky ground. The problem is that if you were taught to believe that the only way for you to go to heaven and your eternity, to spend eternity with God in heaven, is to believe and to have faith. So which in our minds, if we have to believe that faith is also certainty, then the easiest thing that we can do is try to convince ourselves is that our beliefs are certain. And all the beliefs that point to what we already believe, like that we have to hold them very tightly and be very certain about all of our beliefs, because we wouldn't want to put our eternity in jeopardy. And so we use our confirmation bias to continue to inform our own beliefs and reject the things that push against the things that we believe. It's like the game at the fair, where you can go in, you remember the fair, okay, back before COVID, you can go to the fair, okay, one day we'll get back there. But you go, and there's that game where you take the big sledgehammer and you whack the little pad and it shoots the bell up, and the harder you whack it, the higher that it goes up, and if you can hit the bell at the top, like winner, winner, chicken dinner. Sometimes we operate like our faith in the same way, that if we can just have enough faith, if we can have more and more faith, more strength, more power, more faith, that's how we can know we are more certain about all the things of God. A lot of people approach their faith in God this way. There's like this faithometer that's going, where we're trying to measure our faith with this idea that it's all got to be real. We're convinced and we are certain that God is real. And the more certain that you feel that God is real, well, then obviously the more spiritual you must be. For instance, if you were to feel like I'm like 51% sure that God's real, like right, you just tipped over halfway, then that like punches your ticket to heaven. You're good to go. But if you can get like 75% sure that God's real, all of a sudden you like get better parking spots and your sports teams start winning a little more. Right, if you can get 95% certain that God is real, maybe you'd actually experience some answers to prayer. Maybe you'd actually receive kind of like a physical healing because of your certainty that your faith is so big. This belief idea that faith equals certainty, it really kind of sets up some dilemmas. For instance, like this, imagine if you've got Bob, and Bob's praying for his soulmate, right? He's just looking on the prowl, on the hunt for someone that God has just made just for him. And Bob has got Susie in his eye. And Bob's just convinced. He's convinced. He's certain that God, you've made Susie just for me. And he's praying with all this certainty that Susie is that one for him. And on the flip side, Susie's over there saying, oh, God, Bob, he's looking at me again. What a creep, like, God, would you just keep Bob away from me? And she's praying with that same level of certainty that I don't want any piece of Bob, right? Like, I don't want anything to do with it. So what do you do with that? That creates a dilemma. It's like one person praying right now for Gonzaga to go all the way through the dance and win the national championship, and someone else is praying again for North Carolina to take it, right? And it's like, well, whose prayer does God answer? And it's obvious that no one's been praying for the Mariners for a while, okay? But this is a dilemma of when there's two people of faith operating with faith equals certainty, and they are certain that God hears their prayers, and they're certain that God will answer their prayers, but yet their prayers are at odds with each other. So what do we do? What does God do in that situation? So there's this myth that faith has to equal certainty. Another myth is this, that doubt is the opposite of faith. If your faith in God if it is equal to certainty, then that means that any form of doubt or questions that you might have about the existence of God or even about his role in the world would be considered the opposite of faith and damaging to faith. And so here's the problem with that kind of thinking. If you believe that faith equals certainty and that you should never doubt, then the definition of faith, it causes you to do a few things. Like just the definition of faith, it causes you to look for evidence to support what you already believe, right? Because you have to. You can't doubt the things that you believe, so you just have to continue to use your confirmation bias to look for the evidence to support the things that you already believe. So instead of starting with some kind of blank slate or an open book or just an open-handed approach to faith with a clean slate, taking in understanding and reasoning from different people and different cultures and different backgrounds, and saying, what can I learn from them and what can I learn from you? What can I learn from this literature? Like instead of taking that in and be willing to learn and glean things from all perspectives, we say, you know what? No, I want to know who believes like me, and then I only want to allow those people into my life. So faith that views the idea that faith is the opposite of doubt, what happens is we start to look for evidence to support what we already believe, and then in doing so, we build relationships with people who only believe like us. I can't tell you how many times in my life as a pastor I've met people that are new to church, and I'll ask them a question like, how'd you find the meeting place? How'd you find so-and-so at a couple other churches I've worked for? And oftentimes, because they went on the Google machine and they typed in a certain type of church, they often like Christian church, or they go more specific, they go Baptist Christian church, or or Assemblies of God, Calvary, Foursquare, whatever it would be, and they type in a denominational line, Christian church, in the community that maybe they just moved to or that they're trying to find a church in. What are they doing? They're just operating their confirmation bias, saying, well, I want to just go around the people that already believe like me because I believe like I do for a reason. I think my beliefs are right, so I think they're right. And the other denominations, well, bless their heart, we'll pray for them. They're probably doing it wrong. They're less right. We've got the corner on truth, and so I want to surround myself with people who I already agree with. So I'm going to find a new church based on that. It's a fascinating thing. As the meeting place, we're considered a non-denominational church, and even that becomes its own kind of subclass of denomination. Oh, you're non-denominational. And so then people assume that they know what we're like because they have a friend that went to a non-denominational church one time. Or they've attended, and so they just assume, well, you're like those people then. You're the non-doms. And they put us in a group of people, and if it's not like them, it's like, okay, good luck, because it's not, they can disregard us and not surround ourselves with us because we're not like them. That's how our confirmation bias works. And so we build relationship with those who agree with us, but then eventually, and here's the problem with it, eventually we begin to criticize those who disagree. When we start pointing fingers at and we begin to criticize those that are outside of the circle that we've chosen to surround ourselves with. Think about it. If you're taught that certainty in God's existence is what your eternity is resting on, then that's where you're going to start. You'll start with that picture in mind, and then everything you take in and the beliefs that are thrown at you, and you disregard the ones that don't line up with it, because if your eternity rests in the balance, you only want to believe the things that you already align with your beliefs, and because other things could make your eternity, again, put it in jeopardy. And so that approach to faith is, in my opinion, that approach to faith is exactly why Christians and the church for a long, long time has often got this reputation as becoming legalistic and judgmental and bigoted. And that's where those comments, that's where they're rooted from, because we often, in church world and religious settings, we often disassociate with the people that aren't like us, and we only surround ourselves with people that are that, because we're the most right, and we've got it figured out, and we hope they come on board someday as well. But as long as they believe that way, then it's us and it's them. And it gets ugly. It gets ugly quick. And so as long as you never leave those cozy confines of what your version of Christianity is, oftentimes then you don't have to worry about doubt in your faith because you literally have just surrounded yourself with people who will never question your faith. They affirm what you already believe. And perhaps this is what some of you grew up with. You grew up in a church setting or religious setting, and you were told, hey, you just got to believe. You just have to believe. You just need to have faith. Or maybe even you're something like you just need to have more faith. And as if faith is something really that, how do you actually measure it? You just got to have more. Like, tell me how you measure it in the first place. But in the real world, outside of the religious context, we don't think of faith like that because you either believe something or you don't. And when it comes to Christianity or following Jesus, some say, well, you just need to take it all by faith. And do you know what John, again, one of the best friends, maybe even the best friend of Jesus, do you know what John would say? He says who? Where'd you learn that? Who says that? Where'd you get that idea? He's like, Jesus never said that. Look, I'm going to write a whole book about I'm going to write a whole document about this. Jesus never said that. You won't find that in the New Testament writings. I don't know where that idea came from, but when we look at what John wrote about Jesus, we're going to see a completely different way to look at faith and to look at our belief. In fact, there's a guy named Frank Turek, and he does lectures on apologetics and helping us understand why we believe what we believe. And I love what he says about this. He says, the reason so many people are easily talked out of Christianity is because they were never talked into it in the first place. The reason students, the reason college students, the reason singles, the reason even like elderly adults, the reason people are often so easily talked out of Christianity is because they were never talked into it to begin with. They were just told, most of the time at a young age, that you just have to believe. This is what we believe in our house. This is what our family believes. This is who we are. We are Christian. We are Catholic. We are Protestant. We are Presbyterian. We are Lutheran. You're just told that's what you believe. No one was convincing you. No one was trying to teach you. It's just this is what we believe. And so that's just the banner that you live under. That's what you take on, is that you just have to believe. Maybe it was a Sunday school teacher, maybe it was a pastor, maybe it was a parent, but you grew up and then someone eventually speaks to it a little bit differently, and you start to hear things, and it's so easy to be talked out of something that you were never talked into in the first place. And here's what John would tell you. And this is what we're going to see today and over the next few weeks. John would say, I did not follow Jesus because of faith. I didn't just believe. I didn't just have faith. John would actually caution you against that as well, because if the only reason you're following Jesus is because someone told you that you just need to believe, then it's easy for someone else to come along and tell you differently, and then you follow that person. The Apostle John decided to leave his father's fishing business and follow Jesus, not because of faith, but he chose to give up his career in his family's livelihood. He chose to do this because of evidence, because of what he had seen. And when we read what John wrote, history tells us that John's an old man at this time. In fact, he's at the end of his life, and the Apostle Paul is long gone and dead. The Apostle Peter is gone and dead. In fact, John is likely the last one of all the disciples. He's very likely to be the last eyewitness account of Jesus still alive. And so in these last days of his life, he decides to sit down and document what he had seen and what he had experienced and what he had heard when he was with Jesus. And this document, again, it comes to us then as the good news according to John. And John doesn't just tell us what happened, but he also then tells us why it happened. And he tells us why he wants us to know that it happened. So John gives us a bunch of amazing stories. He gives us a bunch of his experiences that he had firsthand, things that he saw and things that he experienced while he was with the tangible physical person of Jesus. And then at the end of his document, he writes basically his thesis, and he tells us why it's so important to him that he gets this document out, that he gets it recorded down. And this is at the end of his account. So towards the end of the document of John, the good news according to John, he says this. He says, the disciples saw Jesus do many other miraculous signs in addition to the ones recorded in this book. In other words, this wasn't just somewhere that nobody was and nobody saw and nobody could verify the things that John's documenting, that John's having written down. This was like People saw this. I saw this. The disciples saw this. Many people experienced these things, and there was a whole bunch of other things they experienced as well. And when he says this book, he's not talking about the Bible. He's just talking about the document that he is writing. So John basically says, I've come to the end of my life, and I want to tell you about all the things that Jesus said. And he said so many more things in this as well. And I want to tell you about all the things that Jesus did. And he did so many more things in this as well. But I've chosen these specific things here in this document and for a very specific reason. And then he lets us in on that reason. And he goes on and he says this, but these are written so that. So here it is. This is why. He gives us the insight why he wrote these down. These are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. And that by believing in him, you will have life by the power of his name. So what John's saying is like, hey, I'm not content with saying just believe. Just believe. I want you to journey with me. He's writing, I want you to journey with me in my experiences. And when you do, John's like, I hope that you'll come to the same conclusion that I have come to. He's not saying just believe, but he's building a case to why we should believe in the first place. I want you to believe, he says, I want you to believe that what? He wants us to help us understand and believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Because he seems to believe something about when you put your trust and your faith in Jesus as Lord, as the Son of God, that's when you truly begin to find life in his name. In other words, the sequence that has brought John to his belief in Jesus, that Jesus is who he says he is the same sequence that he's going to lay out in his document of the gospel according to John. He's going to lay that out for us so that we can journey through that sequence as well. He's like, these aren't miracles just for the sake of miracles. These were signs. These point to something. And so these aren't just me telling you some of my cool experiences. This all has a purpose because this is what I heard, and this is what I saw, and this is what I experienced, this is what I lived out, and this is what had led me to my belief that Jesus is who he said he was, the Messiah, the Son of God. John didn't begin with, well, I just placed my trust in him and kind of just hoped it would work out. Well, someone told me about him, and they led me in some kind of sinner's prayer, and so I prayed and I asked for forgiveness for my sins, and I was kind of good from there. John didn't say, well, one day Jesus sat us down and said, invite me into your heart and then I'll come into your... John didn't use the language that we often use in church world and religious settings when we talk about what it looks like to journey following Jesus and make a decision to follow. John didn't talk that way. He didn't begin with those things. And so what happened is he's like, the disciples were trying to sort all this out, and it's obvious at times they believed that Jesus is who he said he was, and then at times it seemed like they just didn't. And then they'd believe again, and then they wouldn't again, right? They're trying to figure it out. It makes sense that as we journey through this, that we've got questions. It's okay to be spiritually curious people and have questions and our own doubts along the way. And finally, it wasn't a blind faith for John that convinced him or any of his friends, his disciples that were in this with him. It was what they had seen and what they heard and what they experienced with Jesus. And John's saying here, he's saying, hey, I'm going to tell you what I saw and what I heard, and my hope is that this will help you come to the same conclusion that I did. And John organizes his document, the good news according to John. He organizes it around these 7 signs that are pointing us somewhere, signs that are taking us somewhere, signs that help us understand who Jesus is, why he came, and why he did the things that he did. And so we're going to look at all 7 of these signs during this series over the next few weeks. And John, I think it's cool that John actually refers to these things as signs. This isn't just me trying to make things up or use creative words. John calls these signs. He's like, hey, these aren't just miracles for miracles' sake. These were signs that pointed to who Jesus was and what he was up to in this world. John doesn't want us just simply to be enamored by the miraculous. He wants us to pay attention to why Jesus did the things that he did and how it helped progress humanity at that time in history to understanding this Savior that was so revolutionary and compared to the Savior that they were expecting to come into their Jewish culture. Okay, so there's a lot to glean from and learn from that. These signs help point us to who Jesus truly is. And so we're going to look through that and learn from that over the course of this series. But let me lay out for you, here's why this matters. Okay, here's why this is so important for us. In fact, another disciple of Jesus, Peter, probably one of his really good friends as well, Peter says this, and he's got a few small snippets in the New Testament of writings, and Peter says this, "But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord." And I like this, okay? Look at this. "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have." But then he goes on and he gives us some parameters, some guidelines of how to do this. Basically what he's saying is like, there's a right way to do this and there's like a less right way to do this. What's called a wrong way. So when you do this, when you give this reason for this hope, he says, do this with gentleness and respect. Have you ever found someone that isn't very great at that? When they try to tell you why they believe what they believe and they're just not very great at their gentleness and respect. This is what confirmation bias can do to us. It can create these ugly feelings inside of us that when we disagree with someone else or they're bringing beliefs that are opposed to our beliefs and we feel like they rock us to the core, like if we were to even entertain the idea of that, then that would express some level of doubt. And again, doubt's not good, and my eternity is hanging in the balance, so I certainly can't doubt. And so we get defensive and we draw lines. Right, it can be a very ugly thing. Peter here is giving us some guidelines here. Do this with gentleness and respect. Now, some people take this verse, and this verse actually gets them pretty excited. They see a verse like this, and they believe that their eternity, the eternity of every individual rests in their ability to make a decision to follow Jesus and in turn spend eternity in heaven, or to reject Christ and as a result spend an eternity in torment of hell. And so when these people when that's the approach you've got, like these people read a verse like that, and like, absolutely, I'm going to be ready. I'm always going to be ready to give a reason for the hope that I have in Jesus. And it's like this verse here puts them in the game. They can pull up their big boy britches, put on their Jesus Jr. cape, and they're like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go to work here. Like, you want a reason? I'll tell you a reason. Well, do you know where you're going to go when you die? Do you know? You've heard some of these conversations. Maybe you've even had them yourself. Do you know where you're going to go when you die? You're going to spend eternity somewhere. It's either heaven or hell. Which would you choose? Right? There's two worlds, one choice. If you were to go away from here, God doesn't promise you tomorrow, and you could get in your car, go home, and get hit by a Greyhound bus on the way. Like, do you know where your eternity rests? And for so many people, that's their approach. That's what their certainty is. That's what's hanging in the balance for them of like, we've got to convince people because their eternity is on the line here. And that's the approach they take. And they're willing to offend for the sake of the gospel. They're willing to forsake gentleness and respect for the sake of someone's eternity, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever experienced it like in a negative way, but I know for me when I started going to church, this was like the way it was approached. It was always like, if you're not guaranteed tomorrow. And the thing was, it was super, super convincing. It was like, wow, I guess I'm not guaranteed. Like, yeah, like I might get bit by a mosquito and get dung by fever and die in a couple days. I don't know. I might, and I don't want to go to hell, so I guess I want to go to heaven. What do I have to do that? I just have to say like a prayer and mean it, but like God knows my heart, so even if I don't mean it like fully, then He'll have great. Like, okay, I want fire insurance. Right? Like this is like it's a very fascinating. But think about it. What that approach is basically just say, hey, do you want to live in fear? You don't want to go to hell, right? So I'm going to use that fear that you have of hell and try to convince you that you got to make a decision for Jesus so that way you can go to heaven one day when you die. It puts them in the game. They're ready to give a reason for the hope that they have. I don't know if that's the right way or the wrong way, but it's just not the way that I approach that. The way I think of it is much more of like, man, from what I know and what I understand about Jesus, if I could do half the amount of good that Jesus did for the world, if I could love half as well as Jesus loved other people in His life, I really think that this community would benefit from that. I really think that my kids would benefit from having a dad that lived like that. I really think that my family would benefit if we had those values of we're going to love people unconditionally the way that Jesus modeled in his life. I think that this church would benefit from those things. And I do believe that we can anticipate and hope for an eternity where things are better than they are today. But for me, it's hard to gauge what that really is going to be like. But what Jesus has taught me is that we can actually expect heaven now, like today. He actually told us and taught us to pray for heaven on earth, right? For his will on earth as it is in heaven. And I want to do that. And so I pray for those things. And it doesn't just stop with I want to pray for that. I want to participate in that. From what I learn about the love and the grace and the forgiveness and the life of Jesus, I'm like, man, I really think that people around me would benefit from that. Like I personally, and this is my story, and this is how I approach it. I've never followed Jesus for fire insurance, for a get out of hell free card. It's always been, well, Jesus has transformed my life, and I want to help other people experience the same thing. I haven't gotten it right all the time. I'm sure I've been a pain in the ass to a lot of people. But for me, Jesus has transformed my life. And so that's what I want other people to experience as well. And at the meeting place, we exist to be a safe place for people to find and follow Jesus. And guess what? We just take our cues from Jesus. We feel like Jesus, that's what he did. He was a safe person for people to find and follow him. And so we just want to do that. I'll tell you what, you don't have to believe right, behave right, or be right in order for you to make a decision to follow Jesus here at the meeting place. You don't even have to be part of the meeting place. That's not a prereq for you to choose to follow Jesus. And so we just take our cues from Jesus and say, what did people do in the first century? The first followers of Jesus, they weren't told to just believe, just have certainty that God is who he says he is. They just simply responded to an invitation. That's what John did when he gave up his fishing career on a beach one day when Jesus walked up to him and said, come follow me. Because he had heard enough, and he had knew enough, and he had seen enough to say, okay. But it wasn't just an overnight, Jesus is Lord, Jesus is Messiah, I got to go to heaven that happened over time for many of the disciples based on what they had seen and what they had heard. And so John lays out very beautifully this gospel for us, this good news according to John, with 7 signs that help point us to Jesus and why Jesus did what he did and why he is who he said he was. And John's hope and my hope from this series is that all of us, that we can come to the same conclusion, whether you feel like you're far from God or you feel like you've been doing this for a while now, that we can be encouraged and we can just simply respond individually to the invitation to say yes to following Jesus. It's never out of a blind belief. It's never me trying to persuade you to do something. My goal is not to manipulate anyone, because that's not John's goal. It's just to present the evidence, and like we do in everyday life, we form our beliefs based on the evidence that's before us. And so I invite you to journey with us through this series. And I invite you, just like Jesus invites you, to begin a relationship, to follow him without all your answers answered, or without all your questions answered, with your full, trailer of doubt in hand, or in tow, and just bring that along and journey with us, and journey with John as he points us to Jesus. Let me pray for you. God, would you help us to recognize the areas in our life where maybe our confirmation biases actually close us off from learning some of the best parts about Jesus and the best parts about you. God, that we would see you in all of this, that we would see through the signs that John presents in the gospel, that we'd see you and we'd find you and we'd follow you. We're grateful for the way that you've loved, and we want to learn from that love, and we want to love other people the same way. God, for anyone that's in earshot of this, online, in the room, that wants to make a decision today to follow you, God, would you be doing just a work individually with us where we could say, yes, yes, God, whether it's for the first time or the first time in a long time, God, yes, I'm choosing to follow you. And I hope to get some questions answered along the way. In Jesus' name, amen.